Welcome back to the news, everyone. So today we've got to kick things off with a story that broke late last week and has been developing ever since. There's quite a lot to talk about, and you'll probably also know the other channel we do is a World of Warcraft one. It's a pretty big World of Warcraft channel, so this stuff does hit our orbit, and I think because of that, look, there's people I can hit up, people I can get some info from. I'm like, okay in terms of connections and stuff. So, while we're not the first to this story, I hope we'll be able to bring you some, just some insights and a little bit of, color and context to what's going on. So the first thing, the basics of this story is that the state of California has conducted an investigation into Activision Blizzard over the last 2 years. Now, if you actually look at the court filing, basically it's against Activision Blizzard. There's also 10 John Does there, so, will we see names there eventually? There's some thoughts there. But it's a 2-year-long investigation, and overall, the investigation is, while it's not the thing that's been the most newsworthy, the investigator, not newsworthy, but covered the most in the news, the investigation is primarily covering unfair employment practices. So things like, wage disparities, people being looked over for promotions, things like that. Now, of course, the thing that got the headlines is the more shocking and horrible parts of this court filing. Now, the thing I want to just drop in before we dive into this is I have actually heard from a bunch of current and former employees of Blizzard Entertainment on this issue. So, this is allegations. There will have to be a day in court for all of this. However, I will say that based on what I've heard in the grapevine, as well as people's public statements, this is real bad stuff that has been going on. So, in terms of your overall picture, it's described, characterized as a frat boy culture. Right? So basically, you've got a whole bunch of, in a way, right? Sex, drugs, rock and roll. And really, sex, drugs, rock and roll, I don't say that to diminish what's going on, but from my understanding, after having talked to people, doing a bunch of research, I think a whole bunch of it stems from issues long ago in the company. Now, while this has only been happening for 2 years, this particular investigation, I have reached out to people, and numerous people have told me that in the last 3 to 4 years, this stuff has actually been improving with the company, and that basically Blizzard had deep cultural problems for quite a long time indeed. Now, in terms of aspects of this story, there were 3 main things that were highlighted in regards to, I suppose, the worst of it. Number 1 was an Activision Blizzard employee taking her own life after pictures of her genitals were shared around at a party, and she took her own life when she was on a work trip where her supervisor had packed lube in a butt plug. And it seems like there was a very horrible situation from her, and obviously it's fucking tragic that it turned out that way. Now, after some searching around, my understanding is that this is something that happened within Activision Publishing. That particular story is not one that happened around Blizzard. There's then also a story of cube crawls. There's a story of cube crawls, and basically there's also one of male employees kind of just playing some Call of Duty at work and delegating the responsibilities to women with a more junior job title. After some digging around, I now believe that particular story is from Treyarch, which of course is one of the Call of Duty development houses. Now, that said, we do have, this is from the Bloomberg Law article covering the filing. Female employees working for the World of Warcraft team noted that male employees and supervisors would hit on them, make derogatory comments about rape, and otherwise engage in demeaning behavior. I've seen multiple stories, people just just passively like, oh, hey, nice boobs. You're like, what? In what goddamn universe is that a reasonable way to conduct oneself in the workplace? Insane stuff. Now, it does get worse. So, Alex Afrasabi, I believe that's how you pronounce his surname, recently, he was the creative director of World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft, obviously, is, I don't think it's as big as Call of Duty, but I'm fairly sure that in recent times, it is the number 2 earner for Activision Blizzard. So it's a big property. Now, this guy, Alex Afrasabi, of course, people who've been doing what I've been doing on YouTube will know of Alex pretty well, because most BlizzCons, he was there. He was on the Q&As, things like that, and there's a little bit of a story with him on the Q&A as well. But essentially, it is alleging that he has got a long and repeated history of deeply inappropriate behavior in the workplace, getting to the degree of his suite being referred to as, it's misspelled, Crosby Suite in the filing, but it's quite obviously Cosby, as in Bill Cosby. Now, the thing's interesting to me, I'm fairly sure there were rumors and rumblings of Bill Cosby and all of the myriad of things going on there. I believe there's been whisperings of that for a long time, but I believe it was like 2016 that the Bill stuff really came out. And that employees were only calling it the Cosby Suite. Yeah, because you only call it the Cosby Suite when you know about Cosby, and that's a relatively recent thing. That does insinuate that Alex's behavior extended. And I believe this involves not only fans at BlizzCon, but also inappropriate behavior towards fellow employees. That's obviously some really bad stuff. Now, J. Allen Brack, the current president of Blizzard, who took over from Mike Morhaime decently recently, like 2 and a bit years ago, he reportedly had verbal warnings with Alex. The suit mentions him saying, "You're being too friendly," as if that's being too friendly. Now, he's left the company. He left the company in mid-2020, and shortly after that, when I was poking around people, all that I knew about it was that he left the company for Me Too reasons, and that he was a sacrificial lamb. So that he's a sacrificial lamb does insinuate that there is more going on there. Now, also through some of my digging, I do have a list of decently notable names that people have flagged up to me as potentially being problem people. Now, I'm in this position where I think it would be irresponsible to throw that out publicly, because it is just me hearing from a small number of secondary sources. So it's the sort of thing where, if I knew somebody was working with one of these guys, you'd say, "Hey, watch out, I've heard some rough things." But it's not really enough to go and make big public claims. You have to be responsible when you are dealing with, things like this. We'll see what happens, but certainly disappointing rumblings, and it's a lot of stuff that does go back, unfortunately, to old school Blizzard. Now, old school Blizzard is something that I can talk about because I've also reached out to people. I've reached out to people on that. I may as well do that before we just go into the responses from Activision Blizzard, Chris Metzen, J. Allen Brack, and, etc. From what I understand of old Blizzard, right? Got a bunch of, guys, they're D&D loving metalheads. And they find this big success. The power, the fame, the money, the cocaine. I'm not going to say who I know it is with cocaine because, again, for the reasons I said earlier, but, sex, drugs, rock and roll. And that's not me just saying, rock stars do it. We all expect it. It's just groupies. No, I don't mean that at all. But it seems like there was a bit of a culture of that going on at the company. And in a way, you can understand how it would go like that, right? You crunch through a game, you release Warcraft 3, World of Warcraft, bam, you've got all the fame, all the money, all the success, all the adoring fans. And I think we can all see how that would unleash the negative aspects of certain people's character. Now, if a business is being handled well, once those things come up, HR deals with them by protecting the employees. But as we know, often what happens is that HR protects the company. Now, I would say that protecting the company means getting rid of and solving problems in the company, not just brushing them under the rug. But that's the problem. Protecting the company in the short term and protecting the company in the long term are a little bit different, and I think you have an issue here of a HR department that's just trying to cover its ass in the here and now. So from what I understand, they had the seeds of cultural issues going on. You have a bunch of people who get up to some improper behavior. Improper behavior feels like a diminishing way to put it, but you know what I mean, right? So you've got this bad cultural root. Then what happens? Well, oh shit. We are now the biggest kid in the block. We've got the big MMO. We've got all of the big stuff going on. We need to grow this company fast. From what I understand, Blizzard scaled very, very, very quickly. And when it came to their hiring practices, basically, look, you guys know, if you've got to hire, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and you've got to do that really fast, you're obviously not going to be able to do as good a job as if you were hiring a little bit more slowly, a little bit more carefully, a little bit more controlled. So from what I understand, that basically led to the seeds of problems being at the company and then growing. Now, from another thing I understand, it's not the same in various different teams. So the World of Warcraft development team, Team 2, we know they've had issues from this, from this filing. The team that I've heard the worst things about from Blizz diaspora people is actually the Battle.net team. I hear stuff's been historically really bad in the Battle.net team. So from what I understand, these problems basically popped up, kept on going, and from what I understand, management was generally taking a stance of, we're really fucking busy, we've got a lot of shit to do, maybe these guys are our mates, make those problems go away. And I think that's how you lead to, or end up in a situation where the likes of Alex Afrasiabi are, sexually harassing people and, extremely unprofessional, improper conduct for such a long time, and nothing's really done about it. I think that's essentially the mechanics of that. And the reason why I bring this up in terms of mechanics is because this is a Blizzard flavor of a larger thing that happens at workplaces, and we should understand the series of inputs and processes that lead to these outcomes. Because if you just sort of over-ascribe this to just individual bad actors, you can kind of miss out on how, how seemingly good and decent people can end up going in a bad direction and doing bad things, right? We gotta, contend that kind of thing. Now, one of the things that's not went well with this story is the response from Activision Blizzard. It's pretty damn bad. It's very, very, very aggressive. And what's weird is that it's contradicted by an internal email from J. Allen Brack. So this basically says that it includes distorted, in many cases false descriptions of Blizzard's past. It goes on to say that this is the type of irresponsible behavior from unaccountable state bureaucrats that are driving many of the state's best businesses out of California. So if you're to read all of this, you would basically think, okay, totally overblown, load of government bullshit. They're just pushing this for political reasons. They just want to, make an example of Blizzard. Well, if that is the case, you then look at J. Allen Brack's response, which is basically an internal email that got leaked. And, is Jay saying that the stuff is false? No, he's not saying that it's false. He's saying that the allegations of hurt of current and former employees are extremely troubling. So it's a sort of thing, it looks like Jab's statement is trying to take it seriously, whereas the official Activision Blizzard King statement is basically a big, no, fuck this, unaccountable state bureaucrats, very angry. So, you combine those things. Now, we'll say, I've spoken to Blizzard employees who themselves have documented and reported loads of things to HR. And now I've not actually spoken to Blizzard victims of this. I've spoken to a few people around who are basically just like, look, some parts of that, I've heard a range of things. I've heard some people saying that, yeah, there really was a problem. It's maybe not as bad as people thought it was, but there really was a problem. And I've seen other people who have said, oh no, shit was really bad. So there's going to be a range of opinions. There is a range of opinions from the people that I've heard, but I haven't heard anybody who said that this was not a problem and that these things didn't happen. So at least that's what I've been able to turn up from my own research. And then you do have that situation of between the Jab email and the official public response from ABK. Does seem like there's a little bit of, they're being congruent. Now, the thing that really got people was Fran Townsend. Now, Fran has had an interesting career. She's in U.S. government administrations, I believe. I think it was enhanced interrogation is what they call it, but I think there was like a number of like sort of torture scandals and things that she was involved in. So she's kind of got that past that people are very much bringing up. And essentially, when you look at her mail, she says, as the executive sponsor of Activision Blizzard King's Employee Women's Network and our chief compliance officer, she wants to reach out, and she says that it paints a distorted and untrue picture of the company, including factually incorrect, old, and out-of-context stories, some from more than a decade ago. That definitely flies in the face of what many current Activision Blizzard employees are saying publicly, and what a few people have said to me privately. And there's a lot of internal fury over this particular statement at the company. Now, as we move on to other things, there was a response from Mike Morhaime. There was also the response from Chris Metzen. So, of course, Mike Morhaime, former president, co-founder of Blizzard. Basically, the thing with Mike's here, it's interesting. What he says here is, all good and correct, right? That, this is bad shit. He's acknowledging the people being harmed and all of that stuff. What he's not massively acknowledging is, did he know about these things when they were happening? Things like that. Now, what I would say here, and as an example, here's a statement from a Blizzard employee. If I'd known this was happening, I would have stopped it, says the man who was told repeatedly that it was happening and did nothing to stop it. So on that, I've heard from a few people that, the leadership basically did know and that stuff was a bit brushed under the rug. Perhaps even very brushed under the rug. There was a story where basically it seemed to me like Mike was overall stressed, overwhelmed, sent a flippant response to an employee who had CC'd him into a problem, quite a bad problem it had seemed. And the flippant email response that Mike sent, I think led to like HR and leads thinking, oh shit, Mike wants us to get rid of her. Well, okay, what we're going to do is say she's an underperformer and dock her bonus, and we'll keep her in the company that way. Where it seems like it's a sort of thing where, people are good at some things, not that good at others. I've heard a bunch of people say that Mike, basically, real nice guy, really, does care about good things, good at doing the speeches and rallying the troops and stuff like that. But I have heard some criticisms of his ability to run the business from a sort of operational level, in a lot of those sort of day-to-day, boring but extremely important things, including having HR that is producing good outcomes, things like that. And this is stuff that has hurt. It's hurt current employees, former employees, it's hurt the players of their games, and it's also hurt their shareholders. Because I think you can be pretty damn sure that a company where all of these problems happens is not a company where things are being ran to a degree of professionalism that leads to good and successful development of games. And I think we all know that bar a few big hits, Blizzard has been coasting. Right? One of the things that I always bring up is the cataclysmically stupid decision-making that went into the cancellation of Diablo 3 Expansion 2. It's a whole thing we've got into before, but that wasn't Activision Blizzard. That was Mike's leadership team not really making the right call. Of course, D4 ended up being a bit of a production nightmare. And they've had many more production nightmares than we know about. Trust me. Big messes in there. So that is the core of this story. Now, there are many different employee accounts to go into throughout all of this. They generally do not paint a nice picture. I should also mention there is Chris Metzen's statement. Now, Chris Metzen was, basically big creative when it comes to many of Blizzard Entertainment's worlds, characters, etc. Chris is heavily involved in those things. In a way, you could say that Jim Raynor and Thrall, in a way, are kind of self-inserts of Chris. Now, it's the sort of thing, people really like those characters. And actually, if you listen to one of Scott Johnson's interviews with him, you can actually see that Chris's personal life is basically the story of StarCraft 2 Heart of the Swarm, which was an interesting one. But basically, Chris's statement here, again, is a thing of everything he says here is stuff that I agree with, We failed. I am sorry. All of that. Now, the thing that people are pushing back on Metzen is, maybe a little bit more responsibility should be taken. Maybe a little bit more clarity about his role in these things. Did he know about things? Did he not know about things? That's a lot of what people want to know. And the main one was with Alex, because Alex was a big creative on the Warcraft IP, so was Chris, so people would have assumed that they would have worked together quite a lot indeed. Now, Chris did leave 2 tweets about Alex here. As for Alex, I loved working with him and jamming in story meetings. He was someone I thought very highly of on the job. This is where Chris is maybe separating himself, distancing himself. But we never interacted outside of story jams and such. I was never his boss. We never really interacted outside of doing the work or taking smoke breaks. So basically, he's characterizing Alex as, get on well with him, work acquaintance, that sort of deal. Part 2, though. We hadn't worked closely together. It says there, sorry, nice. Obviously a typo. We hadn't worked closely together since Wrath of the Lich King. That was World of Warcraft's second expansion, came out in 2008. I never heard a peep about him other than he could be tough on his team or an asshole from time to time. So learning all this the past week has just been utterly shocking, just reprehensible shit. So it's the sort of thing there, what's exactly going on? Sort of hard to know. In a way, we can't know. And it's the sort of thing, if you speculate too much, that's unhelpful. But maybe we should be critical of statements and be inquisitive about them. I'd say there's a decent chance Chris knows more or knew more than he's really letting on here. Now, you could also say that if, Chris moved on to Project Titan, which he was heavily involved with, Project Titan and then the StarCraft franchise, because, of course, StarCraft 2 is 2010, then you got its expansion packs. You could make the case that the two of them would have diverged in paths when you think about what Chris was really working on in the development of multiple Blizzard games. You could make that argument. You could also make the argument that if it was called the Cosby Suite, and Cosby was only known about in 2016, then perhaps when Chris knew Alex was hard on his team. He was an asshole. Maybe he had some, out of date, some sort of sexist beliefs, things like that at that time. And, maybe it really did get worse after Chris knew him. Could be that. Could be that he was a piece of shit the whole time. There's no real way of knowing until we actually hear things. Now, on Alex, there is 2 little things. There is an incident in 2016 where he was, I believe he was at a convention, bunch of women. He gets into an altercation with them, a verbal altercation, and he calls them a whole bunch of derogatory names. And then Alex ended with, "Do you know who I am?" Do you know who I am? I mean, usually whenever someone says, "Do you know who I am?" that's when it's just transparent assholery. Now, apparently after that happened, Jab, who I believe at the time was producer or executive producer of World of Warcraft. Jab, by the way, J. Allen Brack, current president of Blizzard. I believe that there was a meeting held with all of the women of the Warcraft team where they kind of said, hey, this stuff's going to be dealt with. That was bad incident, not good. But evidently it seems like nothing was really solved there. So that's mostly stuff. What I would say is that generally speaking, there is a general picture of a lot of emphasis on seniority and tenure at Blizzard, and that leading to a lot of bosses, a lot of leads having their character flaws, things like that, quite negatively impact their employees. And I don't mean obviously in the sexual harassment angle, but also in terms of gaslighting, of not taking people seriously, that sort of thing. There's numerous stories there, and even before this kicked off, I had heard a lot about Blizzard having a tenure problem, and just a lot of issues where people who really do have the good ideas, especially for, say, World of Warcraft, people who basically, I would characterize, do know how to fix the game up and move things in a good direction, being generally undervalued, underappreciated, not listened to, and I think a lot of those people are now leaving that team, leaving that company. So it's like if those issues are manifesting themselves in core development work, it's not particularly surprising that when you get to these more serious matters, a lot of problems are cropping up too. So that essentially is there's a lot of details we could go into here, but I think that overall encapsulates the story as well as my general sentiment after I've talked to a bunch of people. I guess the last thing to say is I've heard, at least from Team 2, that like Team 2 is in a better place. Team 2 is the WoW team. Over the last few years, that some of those things have been improving. So I have heard that. I've also heard decently recent issues in Team 2, but I have heard that it's generally getting better. And from what I understand, there is absolute fury at Blizzard Entertainment from the Warcraft development team. From what I understand, they are fucking furious at the Blizzard statement and things like that, and that there's a decent amount of hell being kicked up internally. So, hey Matt.
Hello. What a hell of a story this is to cover, in all honesty. It's really depressing for so many people to have the Blizzard that they know, the Blizzard that they revere, the Blizzard who have been so outwardly positive towards so many members of the community, including like that BlizzCon online, the opening that J. Allen Brack came out with, all of that, the statement about community and players, all that stuff, that seems so shallow in the wake of this entire story now.
Yeah. In fairness, whenever we first watched it at that BlizzCon, we were both sitting there being like, oh my god, this sounds like such corporate wank.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it sounded like just general corporate wank, but it's like, now that you see all the shadows bubbling beneath it a lot more clearly, you can see how it's, it just comes across so much worse.
It does,
and credit to the Blizzard community overall. The response has been about as angry as I would expect. It's interesting to me that you say the Team 2's response internally has been with fury, and one of the staff members tweeted that I don't think they have cancelled work or anything like that or stopped work, but people are saying it's difficult to focus on work.
Yeah.
And they're just not they don't feel as indebted to getting their work done because there's too much to solve before that.
I can share one anecdote of some work they were doing last Friday. Last Friday they were spending time basically scrubbing Alex from the game because there was multiple NPCs and items. So as an example, there's shit that they can't do in it without actually pushing a patch. But what they can do is despawn NPCs. So sure, High Lord or whatever he's called, Afrasabi, the character's a reference to him. That NPC still exists in the game files. The servers just ain't spawning him. And I imagine he will be removed in a future patch. That's one example of work they were doing on Friday.
Yeah, so that's one angle, but the community's response has also been brutal. People really believed in Blizzard as this place, but it feels like such a huge betrayal that even there've been content creators threatening to leave or people deciding not to stream World of Warcraft until they make some actual improvements or some actual statements. So it's definitely not a thing they can brush under the rug very quickly.
No.
Which is something that I'm really, really happy to see, because obviously you see the same in a couple of other companies, and we are closer to the issue, so we'll see more of people's responses. But I think this has been probably the biggest outcry I've seen from a community, because the community is so old and so emboldened together. As
Riot had its problems, and those were very public. But as much as the League community is absolutely humongous, but there's something different about the Blizzard one. Having BlizzCons, right? BlizzCons, which certain developers used, and I believe still do continue to use for certain ends. Which actually does remind me that wolves in sheep's clothing, I believe there's a few of them. There's one or two people who, sort of thing, I can't really share who they are because it's Whisper Network stuff, and it's people being hey, heard bad things, heard bad stories, but it's if the victims don't want to come out, then they don't want to come out. You don't want to force them out. But there's a few people who I've heard things about, and then I see them tweeting their support, and I'm just oh, you fucking slug. You snake. Especially with some of the things I've heard about you, and here you are tweeting support of these people, you rat bastard. That's what it's like, some of these snakes.
Yeah, I think that's something you'll find quite regularly is this is an opportunity for those people who are already chameleons, already buried in as predators among a flock of sheep. They will use it to they'll almost use how fast they are with responding publicly to farm clout, which they can later use for more insidious ends. But I think that gets to a question of community, if the sex, drugs, and rock and roll is what they started with, like how many people joined because they love Blizzard, or how many people joined Blizzard because they love all the clout they could get from joining Blizzard, and how much of that's being abused now.
Well, I think like one example or one analogy, I mentioned it earlier. Is there a difference between a rock star with groupies who acts very inappropriately and badly, and the wolves in sheep's clothing is one thing? I maybe say cuttlefish, because cuttlefish can do all of that chameleon-like crazy shit with its skin, but it's cuttlefish. A shark just goes, you're mine. It's not some big, strong, super out there kind of alpha public character. It's just sneaky little. That's like a few things that I've heard. And another thing I heard as well, and this is something that I think, if you've done a computer science degree, and you've sort of, I hate to say it because, the nerds, it's like us. Okay, you're pretty lucky. You didn't get shit in school. I did get shit in school. A lot of people watching this video got shit in school for liking the things that they like. So it feels really fucking bad to say. But like once, if you go to uni, especially something like, computer science, you can kind of hear the stories of, maybe nerds plus alcohol doesn't always lead to good results if there's, if there's straight people and there's some women involved. It can, people can not act ideally. And, we'll all have anecdotes from, nights out in uni, just seeing, put too much drink in people, and oh dear, a bit of scandal happens. And, it's no different in somewhere like Blizzard, just that it's going to be pumped up with more money, more power. Probably the fact that it's the corporate drinking tab. Stuff like that. I mean, there's a few times, there's like one or two times, like I remember at Unite. So Unite 2016 or 17 we were at. It's Unity, the game engine. I mean, it was Unite Amsterdam. It was Unite Europe in Amsterdam. It was awesome, and they had this party at the end, which was also awesome. Chipsel was there. Everyone was getting very, very drunk. There was free cocktails, free drinks, all great. But then you sort of see just a few people acting a bit creepy, and you're like, better watch out. Watch out, nothing bad happens, and shit happens.
It's really awkward to see that occur so much, especially like in the wake of the Me Too stuff that cropped up a couple of years ago, and how that continually spreads across different industries. It seems like the industries hit, like, I mean, to be fair, it's because of like what perspective I'll have from what news actually makes its way to me. But it's so much of it seems to be around the people who had, they were so powerless when they were younger, had no social status or anything like that. And then as soon as like, films, games, like I guess to an extent some parts of music, but how they start to build up cultural relevance. Yeah. And now suddenly you've got someone who was, like you say, someone who was bullied in school for being a nerd, suddenly has, they've got like 30 groupies around them, or people who are just really excited to see them and like revere them, put them on a pedestal. But then they're like socially maladapted from their younger years. And then that's how you get all of the allegations against people being really weird, but they're too powerful to be told, could you stop? Could you get your hand off me? You creep.
Yeah, like, could you please not touch my boobs in public? Even examples are like, hey, spontaneous workplace back rub? Maybe not.
It's wild. Like, there's some of the stuff coming out in. I mean, if you've got the stomach for it, you should definitely check out like Blizzard employees who are tweeting. I mean, there are definitely people who might come in with other intentions than to just speak their personal truths out. But there's certainly some serious stories that would, like, I don't want to say they make you sick because of how severe they are, but they're just so like how did you get away with that?
Yeah.
Like, just the really subtle things that happen in a workplace, and you're like, anyone reasonable saying that would be like, what the hell did you just say? Like, in what world do you get away with that? So it's really, really creepy.
It's like, you think about like the dynamics of something like, say, The Office, like the TV show. Yeah. And it's like, what would happen if someone just went up and fondled Pam for a bit? You're like, what are the fucking mechanics and like systems of a workplace where like HR then is just, under the rug?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, I just
probably-
say that with The Office because not everyone's going to work in that sort of corporate environment, and it's like it's just a TV show people will watch. People know like the layout of that friggin' office, and you're like, wow, okay, yeah, Not to diminish it by like bringing a TV show in, but it's like legit. How does that happen?
Yeah.
I've heard a story. Don't know exactly who it is, but I believe it was quite recent. But a Blizzard, high enough up Blizzard person says, okay, look, don't fuck your secretary. But if you are fucking your secretary, don't stop. Point being, if you cut that relationship off, then you're opened up to. I do believe that's not the context of. I mean, there's a lot to be said about weird workplace romances and stuff. I think that's to be said in the sort of the context of very improper, not good behavior. Then you stop that behavior. The person who's obviously in a bad position there gets out of that bad situation and is then able to speak about it. But it's like that was like an internal thing somebody said. Somebody who actually has got power and weight within the company is like, what?
It's old boys clubs. That's what happened happened seemingly at Ubisoft, happened seemingly at Riot. People who get in on the ground level get all the power. The culture's established when there's 6 dudes in a room making a game. And then that continues until there's 1,000 people beneath them, but they're still the same old, they're all still in their heads. They're all still in their early 20s having a bit of a gripe. And then that just continues. And then all of the male employees beneath them who are similarly inclined get shielded because it's just what my boss used to do. It's just what my boss used to say. And then that becomes the culture that remains until, because it's like the original people need to really shape up extremely early to shape the culture beneath them. Or you end up with this problem that goes on for, literally decades in some cases of just what is, I mean, I don't want to say what's now considered vile behavior as if it wasn't vile behavior in the past, but people are so much more, they're less willing to accept bad behavior now than they were in the past. So it's like that the bad behavior that was accepted in the past is now, shone a light on for everyone to see, and it's really grim.
I think it's also a thing where general education about the importance of leadership and leadership principles is so much more of a thing now. It's not only that there's so many more books and things like say Jim Collins' work, Built to Last. I think it's Jim Collins. That's books that some people knew of in the past, but most people know of because, I don't know, Tim Ferriss interviewed him, or, someone with a big podcast, or, you think about, should I act improperly at work? Well, that Jocko podcast, I don't know. I think that guy'd snap me in two if I did something bad. But there's so much more general education and emphasis on the importance of quality leadership now than I think there was 20 years ago because certain parts the media and information landscape weren't as developed as they are now. And I think it's just in a void of that stuff. And when people don't see it as being super important and it's all just people, very much boots in the ground, just crunching, which is what it was all like back then, really. Then they get out of that, they get their big win. They don't know those leadership principles. They're flooded with money and power and, drink and drugs. I've heard a few things about drugs being a pretty commonplace over there. And, you obviously know how the shit can go.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
I'd wonder how these things would manifest in a company that does have those more a company where the founders know about leadership principles, where they've set those things up well. I suppose I'd imagine that it's more the cuttlefish characters, the sort of ambush predators, the chameleon style predators, not as much the old sort of old boys club style. I wonder if that's maybe more the problem in modern companies.
I would say it's a combination of the two in a sense, where I feel like the sneakier ones can hide underneath the more obvious ones, because even then, there's the literal case of, someone's harassing someone at work, and then the person who was harassed goes to their perceived ally as backup, but their perceived ally can use that as a way to get in a sneakier way, which is you kind of got the problem of the two different types of, I guess is predation in the modern era, where you've kind of got the older version of, I've got loads of power, I've got loads of money, I'm just going to bully you into whatever, versus the, oh no, I'll be your best friend kind of way. So I think it's there's very two distinct types, and understanding which is actively at play I feel is really, really important for people talking about all of this stuff in a modern landscape.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who will like, they'll try to get close to people in like a supporting position and all of that, with an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is overall the picture that we've covered. Why these sorts of things happen. As for moving into the future, I think what we basically just need is a very clear response from Blizzard. That has to happen. I've heard rumors that Team 2 are actually outraged to the point of wanting to basically go rogue and do their own statement. I don't know if that'll happen. Obviously, corporate power is pretty damn powerful. There needs to be, we know what's going on. Absolutely. We need to also, in a way, and this is the unsatisfying bit, we need to wait and see what happens to this lawsuit. Because, in a way, the professionals are handling this shit. And really, it's their job. So it's like people doing, individual personal Twitter crusades, not going to be anything to do. There are, the legal system is here to, look in. There's a reason why I think there are, it's Activision Blizzard is named, which would indicate that it's a sort of a systemic issue, and you could have some things like what happened with Riot. But there's also 10 John Does. So there's probably a reason behind that. But yeah, we need a very clear response that is backed up with some form of action and assurances.
Yeah,
that's the situation.
Yeah, it's like as much as Riot were dragged over the coals for a long time over it, they seem to have made, at least on paper, the immediate decisions where, okay, here's the council of people that will solve this problem. And I believe, I can't remember her name, but the lady who's in charge of that, I believe, had a big statement about here's what we're doing now, and then, a progress a year later. And I feel like that's the stuff that Activision Blizzard or Activision Blizzard King need to actually get going as soon as humanly possible, because it's just Californian bureaucrats trying to get away with it, almost as if they're threatening to leave. Because we can just go somewhere where we'll not pay taxes here. And that feels like such a no, we don't have, not they're looking at the problem as in this lawsuit's the problem, as opposed to everything the lawsuit points out is a deep cultural problem. They're going, oh, we'll just get rid of the lawsuit, which is why I think that we should probably take some time to talk about the real kind of, not purely financial, but the industry kind of level takeaways from this, because this, particularly from the perspective of people who have feeling grim about logging into Blizzard games, the amount of people who have uninstalled, I mean, it's not I have no numbers, but anecdotally I've seen quite a decent amount of posts across different forms of social media of people going completely scorched earth and getting their accounts deleted, which obviously is a non-reversible process. Yeah. Because it is just completely cutting ties with that. And that's where I'm kind of proud of the community response of just going, no, well, this is not acceptable. I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm not playing these games anymore. I'm done with this entire company. And it comes at the end of a really bad period for Blizzard anyway, between World of Warcraft having all of its issues in the previous year and the fact that, their big wins that, whatever the report was talking about, their big wins were always around the corner. Yeah. And they just keep coming around the corner. Oh no, next year.
The next disaster is always around the corner.
Yeah, the next disaster is always sooner than the next success. Yeah. So that's what they've got next. They've got their Overwatch 2 coming up. They've got Diablo 4 coming up. So if they're hurting their most dedicated community's actual care for those games, how much damage could this feasibly do to Blizzard?
I think decently massive damage. I mean, it's also interesting because it's if all of the good people leave the community, what's left? Is it a case of it's actually just punishing the good staff at the company and stuff like that? I mean, long-term damage is large here. Honestly, I think long-term damage for Blizzard IPs was large anyway. WoW has, this is the tricky bit. There's a bunch of the people in Team 2 who, seem to be very aware of the problem here and are furious and demanding change. And that is, obviously really good. And, we want to support those people who are demanding change and that bullshit doesn't keep on happening. I'd also say that Team 2 is generally moving World of Warcraft in the wrong direction. And just designs the game in a very bizarre way, but in a way where it's like, because WoW doesn't have this like massive industry spanning relevance anymore, they can kind of get away with, because all the WoW mono gamers are still doing it. So it's like WoW was already in a very damaged state, and I think generally in a downturn. But what this is going to do is it's going to catalyze anything that was already happening, and anything that was already happening is almost certainly bad. It's going to catalyze that, and it's also going to murder goodwill. Because Blizzard traded on people's goodwill for a long time, didn't really internally act in a way that was deserving of that goodwill. I think what this is really going to do is it's going to double down on support the team, not the company. People are really going to realize that Blizzard Entertainment is, it is a legal entity that does not have their best interests in mind. The people who are employed by that legal entity, I think, generally speaking, do have the best interests, the players and all that stuff in mind. Generally good people, all of that. But people are, I think, finally going to realize, don't fanboy a company. Don't fanboy a goddamn company. Like the people that work there, support their work, but don't fanboy the company. Because the company's been trying to trade off that goodwill for a long time. And clearly has not always been deserving of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes a little bit beyond the supported team, but not the company, because I think a lot of the problem is the brands that the companies have set up and the IP that they belong to. So the other thing is support the spirit of an IP as opposed to the IP itself.
Yeah.
Because you'll end up supporting some sort of video game or some sort of, basically any sort of brand, you will follow it straight into the pit that industry movers and shakers will drag it straight into for the sake of monetizing the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's happened. But the one thing that I guess we could maybe even end on this point, there's one thing that's really depressed me about it all. And that is, since this news broke following Activision Blizzard's stock price, and it was over the weekend, but, basically not moved.
Yeah, when the story broke, there was barely any movement. Yeah.
Yeah. You would hope that this bears at some capacity poorly on its ability to move in the market, but I guess their corporate response is enough to have investors go,
what does an investor want to do? An investor wants to look at, earnings per share.
Yeah.
A whole bunch, some ratios, a bunch of technical indicators, things like that. And they'll see, okay, this company, big IP, a lot of money coming in, a lot of big potential upside. Cool. We like him. Good. Invest.
Yeah.
Do those people then think, oh, I've done some deep research into World of Warcraft, and really I feel like its core player base is not happy with the state of the game and not really having great faith in the developers? An investor doesn't do that, generally speaking, unless they're going really deep. So, the investors don't know that much. And, of course, it is the buying and selling orders, and, the options, all that stuff of investors that will change that price. And then, of course, there's the institutionals as well. But for the institutionals, I think really they see the likes of the Fran Townsend email and the official ABK response. They're like, oh, okay, they have it covered.
Yep, grand.
That's pretty much that. Those are things, we see them, but they're not meant for us.
Yeah, that's the one thing that annoys me more than anything else. It's this anti-employee, even anti-consumer approach. It's just investors. Consumers will do whatever they want, I guess.
But the thing is that it's hoodwinking shareholders.
Yeah. Because
shareholders should be aware that multiple ABK products have pretty big issues. They should be aware that Blizzard Entertainment has been dragging its feet, having a whole bunch of internal issues, and that the one thing that's holding it up is in a downturn being defeated by one of its competitors. Shareholders should know that. Shareholders should probably, know all the stuff that's going on. So it's just them saving their ass to their shareholders, but is not in a way that is aligned with maximizing shareholder value. Because if you want to maximize shareholder value, you have a well-run professional company with great products. Right now, they have a mixed products, not a well-run company. That obviously is not conducive to long-term shareholder results.
Well,
but I guess the likes of Bobby, executives, etc., what is the timeline on their performance bonuses, things like that. So obviously it's going to be short-term ass covering.
Yeah, I think we're, because I just checked it up here. Their first quarter results were released on May 4th, 2021, which means in the next week or two, we should be seeing their Q2 results.
Yeah.
Which I hope tell a very, very different story.
Well, even, their last results weren't great for Blizzard. I mean, Blizzard was the one that notably it had lost millions of MAUs in the quarter, had a bunch of issues. Well, I wonder.
I certainly wonder.
Maybe
this will be the catalyst for change we need.
Yeah.
Everything will compile into this 2-week period of time where they're taking massive PR damage. Their results show that they're taking massive damage on how much revenue they're bringing, and maybe there'll be some hope there that heads will roll and something will be done to improve. But I guess we will just have to wait and see.
We will. Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. We've certainly gone long in this one, but I feel like it's the way to do this.
Yeah,
is to just sort of get into it.
It's an important story.
What we've heard and what we think. So there you go. There you go, everyone. Let us know what you think, I suppose. Yeah, we'll be back shortly. See you next time.